Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app, and we'll keep sharing amazing conversations. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. As you know, we talk frequently about how to future-proof your career. AI-driven automation is eliminating jobs, especially ones that involve a high volume of repetitive tasks. In general, you've heard me say it before, robots are better suited for jobs that are dull, dirty, or dangerous. However, I firmly believe AI will lead to a net positive creation of jobs in the form of new industries. Many of those we just can't even imagine today. For example, skilled workers will be required to train and manage the bots, to process the data they generate, and to teach humans how to interact with them. Making AI accessible to the next generation is essential. We talk a lot about STEM training on this show. Reducing fear and apprehension about automation is essential before we can embrace that future that we all want, the future of true human-machine collaboration. Well, today's guest knows all about that. In fact, he literally wrote the book on it. It's a children's book called Riley and Bot, Jobs for Robots and Jobs for Me. It's the start of a really important dialogue, and I've been excited to start that conversation here today. By day, Doug Kerwin's the Vice President of Cloud Engineering at Prudential Financial, having spent time in technology leadership roles at places like BillTrust, Trimble Maps, AdWorthy, among others. Doug's also an entrepreneur, having started FrameDart.com all the way back in 2005. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Doug Kerwin to the podcast. Doug, let's take things off. Why don't you share a little bit more about your background and what led you to write the book?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Dan. So I'm essentially a software developer. It's kind of what I've always done from the beginning, and I don't have a formal like training in AI. Like, I'm not an AI expert. I'm more of a consumer of AI. More using cloud tools like AWS Recognition, Lex, SageMaker, things like that. So I generally know the space, but I'm not an expert in it. And what led me to write this book was really just when my daughter was a little younger, she just expressed an interest in we had these few books on just kids' books about jobs, and she just gravitated towards them for whatever reason. And and I couldn't just read these books without kind of stopping and giving my own kind of commentary, on things. So I'd read these, and and I'd come to this job, and I'd have to stop and explain to her. I'm like, well, that's not really a job, and all of this isn't in the time frame of like when you're reading to like a 5-year-old, or she's 8 now, but by the time that she grows up and is able to get a job, it's like I didn't want her to think that some of these things were options, right? And I would always kind of stop and give my commentary on some of these things in general, but we talked about all kinds of things like that. So went out and there aren't really, there are some children's books that are more like STEM related, but there's not a lot in the category in general. And there certainly wasn't anything that addressed automation.
So the book is this fun conversation between this young kid, Riley, and a bot, her friend. And it's very well written to be accessible to the audience you targeted at. But gosh, the themes are pretty sophisticated, and they make you question just a lot about the future of human-machine interaction. And there's one particular dialogue that is Riley saying, I might want to be a research scientist, and bot, that could not possibly be something that could be automated, right? And gosh, I mean, that's the topic for a whole discussion about philosophy and poses all kinds of existential questions. Are STEM careers likely to be automated by bots?
So I started off, with the thinking like, hey, let's steer people towards STEM careers, right? Things that are what I would consider to be better jobs and things that are more resistant to this. But as you really dive into it, you start to come to the realization that nothing is really ultimately going to be like AI resistant. And yeah, and it's definitely not like a typical kind of children's book. I mean, a lot of the feedback that I got, just in talking to people, going through the process of writing it was they're like, wow, you're going to like kill kids' dreams. And, and so I tried to balance that, but, as well, like I said, you know what, like I'm going to do my best at this, and it might upset some people, but like, I just felt like, kids were due like a realistic, glimpse of what the world was going to be like. And I would hope that it would, help push them in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are directly addressed where, it's not just like, hey, if I'm, doing factory work, that's, likely to be automated. I think people generally accept that, or, if I'm in the transportation industry, like if I'm going to be a trucker or something, I mean, people may question the timeline, but I think most people generally know that that's headed towards, autonomous driving. What I think that people aren't necessarily realizing is that it's like, the smart kids have something to be concerned about here too. It's the, like you could go to college and get a graduate degree in something, and then ultimately find out that, that task, your whole field of study might be better performed by AI. I don't know that anything is ultimately exempt from that.
So the book goes from kind of a dark place with Bot challenging Riley about every possible career to then I'd say a more positive tone where, Bot says, well, Riley, people like you are going to be needed to train the bots and tell them what to do. And then there's a fun section at the end where you get kind of all Dr. Seussian on us, and you invent some new jobs. And that's what I alluded to in the opening. There are whole industries, whole careers that we can't even imagine, that I think is likely to be what creates a net positive impact on the economy from, the introduction of AI-driven automation. Talk about that kind of the arc of the book where I think it ends on a positive tone.
Yeah. So, and it's like the beginning of the book starts off more like, here are some specific jobs that Riley is asking about, and Bot's like, no, that's, better done by robots. And when I flipped to the other side, initially I tried to say, I'm like, well, should I list specific jobs that might be good for kids? And I mean, that just becomes tricky, especially when you're looking out at like a 15-year, time horizon kind of thing. And so rather than list specific jobs, what I tried to do was just focus on themes, right? Like of just things that in general, what do people do that's better than AI, right? And so that's things like just complicated jobs, right? Like making decisions and like using AI, but you're the one kind of making the decisions behind things like that. And certainly like anything related to any kind of job that requires empathy, right? So a lot of fields for that require compassion or trust, right? So that's certainly a theme as well. And so, yeah, and we definitely don't know, well, like what are the jobs that are going to be, in 15 years? I mean, there's definitely like a lot of new things, and things are moving fast, and and we don't know what they are. I guess like my personal take on this is that because you can really take this in either direction. There are people who kind of feel that like, well, like you can look at it, and if you believe in in the promise of AI and like any reasonable rate of increased adoption, that you could see how like it could just decimate like entire industries of what people are doing. And I guess like I would say my view is that there's definitely going to be new things that are available that we don't know how to define yet, which is why I just made up silly sounding job names for those. But and I think it's likely, a lot of those categories are people working with AI, rather than it just being like, hey, what are these things that just, on our own, people might be able to do better. I think it's people working with AI, because even the categories where, I'm highlighting that are much more likely that people are going to be better at for, a pretty long time, are not even exclusive. Even when you talk about things like, jobs requiring like empathy, right? Like a therapist or something. It might sound a little bit like science fiction now, but I mean, could an AI be a therapist to you? Like, I think the answer to that is yes. And I think you could argue that it might even be a more effective therapist in some ways. I mean, I'm not completely honest with my therapist about things, even though it's a one-on-one private thing, it's, it is another human being at the end of the day. And so, there, even categories like that, I think, there's potential for AI to be involved, right? And maybe it's not, the only component of it, but I think there's involvement. Like my daughter Mackenzie wants to be a vet, and so she's like, well, what do you think? Is this a good job for me? Is AI going to do my job? And I said, well, no, I don't think so. But you're probably going to work with AI. You're probably going to have, computers and AI like help you make diagnoses on the animals and things like that. So it's not, you're not just going to be doing it by yourself.
The Wobot, a conversational AI-based alternative to a psychiatrist, has received a ton of funding, and I've used it. I'd say it's not ready, but far be it from me to say that it won't be in the next decade. Now, certain careers, I think most people would say, can't be automated, and one of them is yours. So the role of a computer engineer, we've talked extensively on this show about some of the ways that AI models can detect bugs faster or maybe speed up the CI/CD process. We've also talked about initiatives from OpenAI where AI might be a co-pilot for a programmer. What's your take on whether or not the things you do in your day job are candidates for autonomous intervention?
Yeah, so that was certainly one of the things that I was like, well, at least my own field is probably good, at least for my lifetime, right? And somewhat recently, my opinion changed on that, and I remember the exact moment that it changed when I first saw an introduction of GitHub Copilot. And so GitHub Copilot is essentially it uses Stack Overflow and GitHub as data sources where, essentially, programmers have, we've given it the data to say, here's how you do the best functions and everything on Stack Overflow. And it uses that to essentially write code for you. And it's amazingly good. It's just, you just start typing in your function name. And, it used to just be IntelliSense would complete the, just the rest of the function. Here, you just start typing the function name. You don't even complete it. And it already comes up with, here's the whole implementation, like it's done. And you can just hit tab to be like, oh, you don't like that one? Here's another one here. And so it's amazingly good. It was shocking. And I remember when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, I feel a little bit better about going into management now and not being as, as hands-on on keyboard as I have been in the past. Because like, if that's how good that is today, then how good is that going to be in 10 years, right? And so like immediately I saw a path where, if you have a really well-written, Jira story, where you're defining your requirements, where, if you, here are my requirements, here's my acceptance criteria, like it's not a stretch to say in some number of years that the implementation will be automatic by AI. And that's something that like I had always considered, my own, profession to be, like one of the last things, like I wouldn't have to worry about that. But I think that just, it at least encouraged me to say, like, look, I think you longer term, like, you have to be a level above just writing the code, right? You've got to, because even that is not exempt from automation. So you have to either be in, architecture, which is that, like, category of jobs to say, like, complex, complexity or making decisions, right? So it's, that's a lot further off, right? GitHub Copilot is not going to come up with your whole application. It's just, but once you start to say, like, all right, well, here's a specific thing I want to implement, it's going to help you a lot with that. And that might be able to auto implement in the future, but it's not going to come up with your entire architecture, or what application should we build anyway, and what features do business users want, and things like that. So I think it encourages you to take the next step up from that, to, again, just consider the whole situation, rather than just say, I'm just going to write the code.
So let's say the Copilot approach becomes prevalent, maybe even in the next decade. Who is responsible if Copilot introduces some bugs that might have, broad negative consequences? Software that builds a bridge and the bridge falls down, or software that's used for self-driving cars and the car crashes because of a bug introduced by Copilot type of software. Who's responsible for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is the same kind of question for the self-driving car. If it hits somebody, who's responsible? Is it the owner of the car? Is it the manufacturer of the car? Is it the manufacturer of the AI? Right? It's and I don't know that we have an answer to that yet. But ultimately, if you're the owner of a certain application that you're putting out there, whether you're paying people to do the implementation for you, or if you have AI to do it, I feel like you're ultimately accountable for that, would be my opinion.
So when this conversation gets kind of creepy and dystopian is when we talk about a world where bots are creating bots, and somehow they have some kind of through reinforcement learning, some kind of objectives that they're trying to achieve, and potentially they go rogue. How real of a concern is that?
I don't know. That seems a little further out there to me. That's almost, when you're bots creating bots, it's almost the whole self-aware kind of concept. I mean, as of right now, like, I don't know. That's not an aspect of this that I worry about.
So Riley and Bot is clearly a book for parents to read with their kids. What has the early reaction been from parents? Are they frightened? Are you getting hate mail?
No hate mail yet. But I mean, I did expect that sort of thing. But no, it's been a very, a positive, reaction that I've had from people. But I did write, it's a children's book, but I kind of described it as, like, it's a book for children and parents, because I feel like it's, the parent reading the book to their kid may be discovering these concepts for the first time themselves. And, just in a lot of the conversation, that I have with people, even when you just talk about, like, hey, some number of years from now, and people have different opinions on the speed of this, but, like, the transportation industry is not really going to be a thing anymore. That's going to be self-driving vehicles, right? So I think that's one of those categories that to me seems almost like a no-brainer. But a lot of people, when you talk to them about that, they think, they still consider that like science fiction, to be like, well, yeah, eventually. And eventually, I think in a lot of people's minds is like, 25 to 50 year kind of time frame. And so I meant it to be something to educate parents as well, that maybe you just bought this book, for your kid because you thought it was a good choice for STEM reasons, or your kid likes robots, or something like that. But my hope was that it would be like a conversation starter, and also like a way to educate parents about the same thing that might not know much more about that than their kids in some cases.
You mentioned you're having the conversation with Mackenzie about wanting to be a veterinarian, and she probably rightly assumed that that's not a job that will be replaced. And I imagine it leads to skills like empathy that are probably future proof, like you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the other things that you would encourage Mackenzie to be learning as a kid that will, always be needed, even if we look out, into the future where bots and humans are coexisting?
Creative categories are important and are going to be increasingly important as well. I would still, despite everything I've just highlighted about, GitHub Copilot in my own industry, like I would still, direct, my kids towards, towards more of like an engineering career path. I would love it if they would, become engineers, but I don't ever want to, push that on them. I think there's still, this is in that category of who knows how exactly things are going to play out and what those jobs are going to be, in 15 years. I think that you're, even if, you have things like writing your code for you, I don't know that doesn't mean that the whole industry is not a thing anymore. I think it's still a good area in general to go into.
There's an illustration of bot painting a picture with kind of a painter's cap on or something like that. So an example of creative field, and we've seen interesting examples of digital art. Certainly, the field of NFTs is exploding, and potentially those could be things that AI could generate. Is that a niche, or is there a real threat to people in creative professions?
Well, I don't know that I wouldn't consider it so much a threat, but it is fascinating to know that it is a thing. I think that people think that the least of what AI is capable of doing is creative tasks, like things in the arts. But I mean, there are examples now. I mean, you can just look at these things on YouTube where like AI is making music and AI is making art, right? And it does that in a way. It doesn't just start from nothing, right? It's going to take a bunch of data, like other art or other music, with data about, is it good? Do people like it or not? And there happens to be a lot of data about things like, do people like music or not, right? And it's going to take that and just start generating its own music. And you think, like, how different is that from like how we behave ultimately, right? Like it's not like we just paint a sunset on our own. Like we saw a sunset and we're inspired by it, right? So, I think that, again, more likely here, it's where people and AI are going to work together. Like I think like the artist of the future is it won't be that he made the form of art entirely on his own. I think it's going to be that like AI might be involved in that, right? And maybe AI is like a tool, just like the paintbrush is a tool in making art. So I think it probably is a paired effort, but in general, even though AI is capable of doing that in writing, right? I mean, we have entire like news, articles that are generated very quickly by AI right now, that people, probably read articles and have no idea that it was written by an AI. But that's different than writing a novel, or just taking a complex topic and writing a very thoughtful piece on it, right? I don't know that is something that we're going to see AI kind of take over. So I wanted to point out that the creative categories are not exempt, but I think they're still generally going to be the areas to go into. And even when you consider career paths, like STEM career paths, like I think you're going to need to be more creative, right? Because it's not just going to be the lower level, let me just do the engineering. It's going to be more like, let me apply my creativity to this, and I can use tools like AI to carry that out.
I've said before on this show, what can be predicted is better left to machines, but what requires rational judgment or empathy, the term you use, those are tasks that are better left to humans. We've seen projects like ones introduced by OpenAI, where, to your point, AI is great at summarizing a large corpus of text, writing news headlines, but mostly it's derivative works. It's predicting the next set of characters or summarizing or aggregating. But when it comes to truly unique ideas, we have to be very wary of the fact that even in these, quote, creative pursuits, bots get trained on bodies of existing creative work. So things like being able to introduce speech. There's some interesting examples of Heath Ledger or celebrities who died. You can go back and fill in the gaps in dialogue from maybe scenes they didn't finish. So things like that are more prediction tasks. But generating the next Heath Ledger, digitally, I think that's harder because it's such it's such an innate part of the human experience to be able to create that character. Would you say that's consistent with kind of what led you to write the book? Do you believe that some of these innate human skills will always kind of transcend things that machines can do?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Mainly like I wanted there to be a warning that a lot of there's an awful lot of jobs that we have that are more task based, right? And again, they're not all like warehouse and driving kind of jobs. They're like college graduate kind of jobs as well, and things just like diagnosing illnesses and things like that, right? If you think about like how much better like AI can be at that. I mean, like in the future, like I would expect that just things like, we upload pictures to Facebook of our kids, right? Like of all the data that's out there, like, Facebook or something like that. Like, I mean, obviously there's privacy, concerns and things in the mix, but if it were just up to the technology, like Facebook could probably diagnose autism in your 2-year-old just by the pictures that you upload to it. Whereas you might not have any idea as a parent to even talk to a professional for several years after that. And so like how much better is that at diagnosing something necessarily than like what a person can be? And just like a key moment like that I had just for like my own like understanding of like how powerful this can be is like if you look at some of the things that like Google DeepMind in particular can do, and like if you just go on YouTube and like look for videos of this, like you can watch videos of like Google DeepMind like beating all the old Atari games, right? And people will kind of show you where like it starts off. And it's like the first time it plays a game, it's like completely clueless. Like it doesn't even move. It's like a baby was playing the game. It has no concept of like what to do. And then you see it like 100 games later and it knows to sort of at least try to move, but it's still completely, and then you see it like 1,000 times later and 100,000 times later. And then, and some X number of thousands, millions times, whatever times later, like, and it's just like, it's unstoppable. It is the best player in the world at that game. And it's just beat like all of them. And then you even take it like, to the next level where you can watch Google DeepMind play StarCraft, right, against people, which is a much more complicated game than, all those old Atari games. And it requires a lot of, skill and strategy. And again, it starts completely clueless. And by the end, it's like a master. And so, when you consider like, hey, this technology, that wasn't, it wasn't built to play StarCraft. It's just a general technology to say, I'm going to learn things. And it just, it can have like what would take us like a lifetime of playing the game that it could do within a number of like, days. And how good it can get at a task like that. Yeah, that's where we have to say like, like, hey, if what I want to do ultimately is, some kind of task, even if it's even if it's a STEM related thing. And it's like, yeah, it would be, you have to be very specialized and know what you're doing and have a lot of expertise like in that area. But if what that is something that, ultimately an AI can come in and in a few days learn to do it. And it's not going to, do it necessarily just, as good as people, right? Or like, can we get AI to drive as good as people, right? I mean, I think the magnitude that we're talking about here is that it will be able to do it like a number of times better than people, like multiply it by however good we could be at it. And so it's just like, those are the things that, I think we want to avoid and, instead, move towards these areas where, you can apply creativity, use AI for the tool that it is, and try to take that approach where you're being more creative in directing like what the output of that whole activity is.
I gotta get off the hot seat, but not before you answer one last question for me. So let's envision a world where my daughters or Mackenzie, your kids are in a career, and they coexist with machines. Anything that's routine, probably going to be something that's offloaded to the machines, and then there's some delta that the kids will be doing now kids as adults. But assuming that's the case, when we take out the routine tasks, maybe we get back, I don't know, call it an hour a day. what changes about the human experience when all of a sudden we can get done, let's say 8 hours of work in 7 hours? What do we do with that dividend of time? And how does that change what it means to be a human?
That's a good question. Hopefully, we do something productive with that time and not just do social media or things. Hopefully, we're doing. I think well, I'd say a combination of we're doing better tasks, and we're using that time to maybe even step back and be more thoughtful and strategic about the things that we go into in general. And on the other side of it, like, maybe we don't need to work ourselves to death. Maybe we can, just have some extra time. I mean, if we can, if we can be as productive in, what now is like, like a 9-hour workday kind of thing. And if I could do that same thing in like 5 hours because of, AI and all these tools, maybe there's a future where we have, better work-life balance in general. I think that would be a good outcome.
Well, when that future is a reality, maybe we'll have you back, and there'll be another chapter for Riley and Bot, and you'll be talking about it on the show. Good stuff. Well, Doug, before we can let you go, what's next for Riley and Bot, and where can we learn more about the book?
Riley and Bot, the characters and kind of that set of names it was created because there might be some other adventures that they could have. I don't have anything planned for it at the moment, but we'll see where things go. And you could find me on Medium. Just look for Doug Kerwin on Medium, and that's where I would have anything so far related to the book.
Excellent. Well, Doug, thanks for coming by and hanging out. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan.
Good stuff. That's Doug Kerwin, author of the Riley and Bot book on jobs for robots and jobs for me. And that's a wrap for this week. This is your host, Dan Turchin of AI and the Future of Work. But we'll be back next week with another fascinating guest.